Today, I bring you a charming new mystery featuring none other than the brilliant Hercule Poirot, the world's most famous Belgian detective, created by Agatha Christie. This case is filled with twists, clever clues, and Poirot's signature little grey cells at work. Make yourself comfortable, and let's unravel this elegant puzzle together. And if you'd like, leave a quick comment and tell me where you're joining from. It's always a pleasure to know where our little detective community is tuning in from. Now let's get started. It was on one of those pleasant, unusually warm spring weekends that Hercule Poirot and I, Captain Arthur Hastings, found ourselves rolling into the quaint village of Little Renford. The countryside was dotted with white blossoms and the hedgerows hummed with bees. It was, as Poirot put it, entirely too pastoral for a man of refinement, but tolerable with proper shoes and accommodation. We had accepted an invitation from my old schoolmate, Charles Meredith, who now ran a small antiques shop in the area. Charles had written with such enthusiasm about the annual village fête, a spectacle of English rural charm, he'd said, that I convinced Poirot a brief retreat would do him good. "My friend," said Poirot, settling back in the carriage with his customary elegance, "I have no objection to this little holiday. But let it be understood, I am not to be made to judge a pie competition or engage in sack races. The dignity of Hercule Poirot shall remain intact." I laughed. "You'll enjoy it more than you think." Little Renford Station came into view, a solitary platform with a flower bed arranged to spell out "Welcome." Meredith awaited us, waving cheerfully. We were soon escorted to our lodgings, a charming ivy-clad inn with polished oak beams and the scent of fresh scones drifting from the kitchen. Poirot, after inspecting the room with the scrutiny of a hotel inspector, declared it acceptable. "The bed is symmetrical, the wallpaper, though quaint, is aligned without error. Bon, I shall stay." And with that, we unpacked and prepared ourselves for a weekend of village merriment, entirely unaware that within 24 hours we would be faced with one of the most baffling murders Poirot had ever encountered. The next morning, the village fête was in full swing. Children ran between the bunting-draped stalls, ribbons fluttered from maypoles, and the air was filled with the mingling aromas of toffee apples and roasting pork. A brass band played valiantly near the cricket pitch, slightly off-key but spirited. Poirot, immaculately dressed in his dove-grey suit and gleaming shoes, stood out among the country coats and flat caps like a Parisian orchid in a field of daisies. I had entered him, without his knowledge, into the best-dressed visitor contest, which he won within minutes, to his great satisfaction. "Ah, Hastings!" he beamed, holding a small rosette. "At least these good villagers recognize true sartorial brilliance." We were chatting with Charles by the flower-arranging tent when it happened. A sudden shriek, piercing, almost animal in its intensity, sliced through the general cheer. Heads turned, and gasps rose from the crowd as an elderly woman, her gloved hand clutching her chest, staggered back and pointed a trembling finger toward a man near the coconut shy. "It's him!" she cried. "It's really him! But he's dead. He died 20 years ago." Before anyone could reach her, she collapsed in a faint. The crowd surged forward in alarm. The man she had pointed to, tall, well-groomed, and deeply tanned, looked around in stunned confusion. Poirot, ever alert, moved swiftly to the woman's side. A nurse from the village came running, and after a few tense moments, the woman, introduced to us as Mrs. Weatherby, regained consciousness. "I saw him," she whispered. "He was at the river that night. I saw him drown." Poirot arched a brow, and I saw the familiar gleam in his eye. "Curious," he murmured. "Very curious indeed." The man at the centre of the commotion identified himself as Mr. Harold Merton, a respected local gentleman known to nearly every resident of Little Wrenford. He looked genuinely unsettled by the incident, claiming he had never seen Mrs. Weatherby in his life. "Poor woman," he said, "must have mistaken me for someone else. I've lived here 3 years now. Perhaps I resemble this drowned man." Poirot observed him closely. "You are very calm, Monsieur Merton. Most men, when accused of being long dead, would protest more vociferously." Merton smiled uneasily. "I'm a solicitor. Calm is part of the profession." Curiously, the villagers vouched for him. Each one, when questioned, insisted that Harold Merton had been part of the community for years. The vicar, the shopkeeper, the postmistress, all remembered him arriving, setting up his office and attending Sunday services with predictable regularity. But something nagged at Poirot. 3 years, he mused to me later. Not 5, not 10. And yet he is known by all. Too much consensus, Hastings. It is overcompensated. I suggested we consult the local constable, a rather young and timid man named Blythe, who confirmed that Merton had indeed registered in the village books 3 years ago. But beyond that, there were no prior records, not even a forwarding address. No schoolmates, no family, no letters, Poirot said. No past. As the sun dipped below the horizon, casting long shadows over the village green, we returned to the inn. Poirot's brow was furrowed, his fingers absently aligning the salt and pepper shakers on the table. "Hastings," he said, "I do not believe in ghosts, but I do believe in deception, and I believe we have just seen a master of it." It was after luncheon that Poirot, never content with hearsay, insisted on a quiet word with the local constable. Constable Blythe, a rather sheepish young man with sandy hair and a perpetually anxious expression, agreed to meet us behind the village hall, away from the hum of the fete. He glanced around before speaking, as though fearing the hedgerows might be listening. "I probably shouldn't be saying this, Mr. Poirot," he began, "but you seem like someone who doesn't miss much." "Quite so," Poirot said, his eyes narrowing slightly. "Let us assume I miss nothing." "Well," Blythe continued, shifting from foot to foot, "Mr. Merton, Harold Merton that is, he only came to the village 3 years ago. Not that it's odd exactly, folks come and go, but usually there's paperwork, background, family. He had none of that." Poirot tilted his head. "You speak of records, yes?" "Exactly. No forwarding address, no parish records, not even a proper reference letter when he bought the cottage. Just a tidy sum in cash and a solicitor from London who handled the sale. Reverend Bates vouched for him after a few weeks, and that seemed enough for most folk." Poirot folded his arms and regarded the constable with interest. "And for you, mon ami? Was it enough for you?" Blythe hesitated, then shook his head. "Truthfully, it never sat quite right. But he paid his taxes, smiled politely, and never gave reason for suspicion, until today." Poirot glanced at me with quiet intensity. "So the roots, Hastings, do not go deep. He was known, but not truly known." That evening, the air had turned cool, and the festivities gave way to quiet candlelight in the inn's dining room. Poirot had spent the better part of an hour arranging his cutlery so that the forks pointed precisely toward the bread plate. "I cannot abide chaos," he muttered, eyes narrowing at the misaligned salt cellar. I was about to tease him when the innkeeper came rushing in, face pale as his apron. "Begging your pardon, sirs. Terrible business. Mr. Merton, he's been found dead, in his greenhouse." We followed him without a word. The Merton estate lay a short walk from the village centre, a modest but handsome home flanked by manicured hedges and a curved glass greenhouse at the rear. Inside, the scene was macabre. Harold Merton lay sprawled across the stone path between rows of orchids, beautiful, exotic things in vibrant pinks and yellows. His skull had been caved in, blood spattered across a broken pot. No sign of forced entry, no sign of a struggle. A copper watering can lay beside him, dented. Constable Blythe arrived moments later, breathless and stunned. Poirot did not approach the body immediately. Instead, he gazed at the flowers. "Orchids," he murmured. "They require precise care. The balance of light, moisture, temperature. Such symmetry, delicate, exact. A greenhouse is a place of order." I stared at him. "Poirot, the man's been murdered." He turned slowly, expression hardening. "Just so, mon ami. Murdered in a place of beauty, which means the killer wished it to remain so, controlled, symmetrical." He knelt beside the corpse. And therein lies the contradiction that offends me most. We called the next morning upon the Merton estate, a modest country house tucked neatly behind a line of tall beech trees. Its red brick facade and gabled roof gave it the look of a respectable solicitor's dwelling. Quiet, practical, and entirely unremarkable. Yet I could not help but feel, as we approached, that something unspoken lingered in the shadows of its windows. Poirot, walking with his usual measured step, cast an appraising glance at the ivy that crept up the side of the house. "You observe, Hastings, how nature seeks to conceal, not to reveal. The ivy, it obscures the brickwork. The curtains inside, drawn just so. This house, mon ami, is one of secrets, not sorrows." We were greeted by a housemaid, a pale young woman with red-rimmed eyes, who introduced herself as Polly. She led us through a quiet hallway into a sitting room where Evelyn Merton waited for us. The room was tastefully furnished, if a touch cold. A marble mantelpiece held 2 symmetrical vases, yet one held fresh roses, the other was empty. "A symbol, Hastings," Poirot murmured softly as we entered. "One vase full, one empty. Grief, perhaps, or guilt." Evelyn Merton stood as we entered. She was an elegant woman in her early 40s, her morning dress impeccable, her face pale but composed. Her hands, I noticed, were clasped tightly in her lap, knuckles white. "Thank you for coming," she said. I suppose this is the usual thing. Asking questions, I mean?" "Madame," Poirot said gently, "we do not pry for the sake of curiosity, but when the symmetry of a man's life is broken by violence, I must restore it." She blinked at him, uncertain. Poirot bowed slightly. "Let us begin with what you can tell me about your husband." Mrs. Merton sat back down, folding her hands in her lap once more. "Harold was a good man," she began, her voice calm, almost rehearsed. "Private, of course, but kind, devoted." Poirot nodded. "Private, yes. And how long were you married, madame?" 4 years. We met in Brighton. I was working at a gallery. He came in one day and, well, things moved quickly. We married 6 months later and settled here. He always wanted a quiet life." "Indeed," said Poirot, steepling his fingers. "And this quiet life, did it include visits from old friends, family, business associates?" Evelyn hesitated. "Number Harold didn't have family. He said they'd passed away. He didn't talk much about his past. I thought it was a matter of old wounds. He said the war had changed him." Poirot leaned slightly forward. "And you never asked? Never wished to know more?" She flushed. "Of course I did. But he was gentle about it. He'd change the subject. Say it was all long ago and not worth digging up. I respected that." "Very noble," murmured Poirot. "And did you ever see photographs of his youth? Papers? Anything official?" No, nothing really. There was a drawer in his study he kept locked. He said it was legal files." Poirot's moustaches twitched. "You have not opened it?" "I don't have the key." There was a brief silence. Poirot rose and walked slowly to the window. Madame, your husband was murdered with precision, in a place he loved. The orchids were undisturbed. The greenhouse was locked from the inside. This suggests forethought, familiarity, and perhaps fear. Mrs. Merton's hands gripped the chair arms. Are you suggesting I— No, madame, he said quickly, raising a hand. I suggest only that when a man's past is a void, we must be cautious about the present he offers. Our next interview was with Roger Bentley, a tall, athletic-looking man in his 50s, who greeted us with a firm handshake and the air of someone keen to appear helpful. Horrible business, he said, ushering us into his conservatory, which overlooked a blooming row of foxgloves. Can't believe it, to be honest. Harold was a good man. A bit aloof, sure, but steady. Dependable. And a friend of yours, yes? Poirot asked, brushing imaginary dust from his sleeve before sitting down. Oh, yes, Bentley replied. We played cards, shared a whiskey now and then. I was best man at his wedding. Then you must have known him before he arrived in the village? Bentley hesitated just a moment too long. No, actually, we met here. Shortly after he moved in. Struck up a friendship over a property dispute, would you believe? He helped me sort out a boundary issue. Very generous of him, Poirot said with a faint smile. And his background? He spoke little of it. Not much. Said he was a solicitor, used to work in London, moved to the country for peace and quiet. Can't blame him. And yet, Poirot murmured, you speak of him as one might speak of a cousin, familiar, familial. You knew him deeply, or not at all? Bentley's jaw tightened. What exactly are you getting at, Monsieur Poirot? Poirot stood, adjusting his cuffs. Only that when a man is murdered, the past becomes very much alive, Monsieur Bentley. It walks through doors. It opens locked drawers. Bentley's lips parted, but he said nothing. As we left, I turned to Poirot. You don't trust him? Poirot gave a small shrug. He is a man who knows too much and too little at once. That is never natural. It is performed. The village vicarage, with its ivy-strewn porch and overgrown roses, had a charm that was clearly more neglected than curated. Reverend Lionel Bates received us in his study, a room that smelled faintly of must and sermon paper. He was a tall, solemn man in his 60s, with a stooped posture and watery blue eyes that darted nervously from Poirot to me and back again. A dreadful tragedy, he intoned, gesturing for us to sit. Mr. Merton was a pillar of our community, dignified, polite, a man of few words but of sound principles. Poirot, resplendent as ever, tilted his head slightly. You speak of him with certainty, Monsieur le Révérend. May I ask, how long had you known Mr. Merton? Since he arrived, of course. 3 years ago. Bates cleared his throat. He began attending services shortly after settling here. Never missed a Sunday. Generous with the collection plate. I had no reason to doubt his character. Poirot's fingers drummed lightly on the arm of his chair. And yet, character is not merely a performance, n'est-ce pas? It is not measured in pew attendance or polished shoes. Bates looked taken aback. I beg your pardon? You vouched for Mr. Merton during the purchase of his property, did you not? I did, yes. The seller requested a local reference. I agreed, despite knowing nothing of his life before Little Renford. Bates hesitated. He seemed harmless. Quiet men often are. Poirot leaned forward slightly. And yet, when quiet men die violently, I begin to wonder what music they were concealing. The vicar shifted uncomfortably. Surely you don't suspect Harold of wrongdoing? Poirot smiled thinly. Monsieur, I suspect everyone of something. It is my nature. As we took our leave, I whispered, You think he's hiding something? Poirot nodded gently. Not what, perhaps, but why he chose to speak so precisely. Every sentence was rehearsed. The cloth may cover many sins, Hastings, but it reveals patterns as well. Back at the Merton house, we found Polly Haynes, slender, sharp-eyed, and more perceptive than she initially let on, dusting the stair rail with a resigned diligence. She looked up, unsurprised by our return. "If you're after Mrs. Merton, she's upstairs resting. Been a lot for her," she said. "It is you we wish to speak with, mademoiselle," said Poirot. "Your eyes, they are not resting. They see much, I think." She flushed, but nodded. "I suppose I do." Poirot gestured toward the study down the hall. "The drawer, locked, yes?" Her brows lifted. "You know about that?" "I know that secrets prefer drawers with keys, and keys prefer silence." She led us into the study. It was a sparse room, books neatly shelved, a large mahogany desk standing prominently near the window. The second drawer on the right was indeed locked, the handle slightly worn, as though frequently touched but rarely opened. "Mr. Merton never let anyone touch it," Polly said. "Once, I accidentally moved his papers when dusting. He got sharp, not angry, just stern." Poirot crouched beside the drawer, inspecting it but making no attempt to force it. "He kept it very private," Polly added. "Sometimes, late at night, I'd hear him in here, opening it. Then silence, not writing, not speaking, just sitting." "Curious," Poirot said softly. "A drawer that holds no noise but heavy thoughts." She nodded. "I always thought, maybe it wasn't about what was in the drawer, but what he was afraid someone might find in it." Poirot straightened. "Merci, mademoiselle. You have helped more than you know." We met Clarissa Weatherby near the edge of the village, where the gravel road tapered into farmland. She was seated on a bench beneath a hawthorn tree, twisting a handkerchief between her fingers. Tall and slim, with a quiet, composed manner, she bore little resemblance to her excitable mother. "I imagine you're here because of what happened at the fête," she said coolly, not bothering with pleasantries. Poirot inclined his head. "Indeed, mademoiselle. Your mother's reaction to Monsieur Merton, was it entirely unexpected?" Clarissa hesitated. "I didn't believe her at first. She's had episodes, moments of confusion." "Yet you appeared shaken," Poirot said, watching her carefully. Her eyes flicked up. "I was embarrassed, not shaken." "Non, mademoiselle, you were both. The eyes, they betray what the lips deny." She flushed. "All I know is she once told me a story, years ago, about a man who'd swindled my father's company, said she saw him jump from a riverbank and disappear. I thought it was grief talking, or fantasy." "And then you saw him again?" Clarissa looked down. "Yes, and no. It was like something familiar in a stranger. It frightened me, not because I believed her immediately, but because part of me wanted to believe her, as if some unfinished chapter was being reopened." Poirot leaned in gently. "You received no letter, no warning?" She flinched almost imperceptibly. "No." "Très bien," he said softly. "Then we shall consider that answer, like the drawer, locked. For now." We returned once more to the Merton study late in the afternoon. Poirot had requested that the constable send over Harold's personal effects, which now sat in a neat pile on the desk. Some letters, a set of keys, and a small wooden box bound with a delicate clasp. "Mon ami," Poirot said, unclasping the box with an elegant flick of the wrist. "In such a place one does not find answers, one finds intentions." Inside the box were several loose items: a pocket watch, finely engraved but without initials, 2 letters, and a faded photograph, worn at the edges. Poirot picked up the first letter and examined it closely. Dated June 1922. Addressed to James Harwood. He raised a brow and tapped the paper. "It is signed by a solicitor in Cardiff, confirming the transfer of funds to a numbered account. And yet, The signature has been retouched. Forged, I asked. He nodded. Badly, but convincingly, for those who do not observe. He handed me the letter and turned to the pocket watch. Inside the watch, opposite the dial, was a small, oval photograph. A woman in a 1920s dress, unsmiling, with sharp cheekbones and a proud expression. I didn't recognize her. Poirot's voice dropped to a whisper. She is not Evelyn Merton. An earlier love? I suggested. Or an earlier life, Hastings. Poirot placed everything back gently and turned to the final item, a thin file tucked beneath the box. It was marked Military Service Record. Conveniently placed, he muttered, flipping it open, and predictably sparse. Name, rank, service number, all consistent with a decorated career. But, he pointed to the signature line, no official seal, no department authentication. In short, a fabrication. So the war record's false too, I said. Poirot tapped his temple. It is a web, Hastings. A man weaves it not to trap others, but to protect himself. And yet, every strand he spins tells a story. We must now ask, who was he before he became Harold Merton? I looked at the photograph again. And who is she? Poirot smiled faintly. That, mon ami, is a question the past will answer. It was nearing dusk when we made our final call of the day, to the Weatherby house, a stately residence just beyond the churchyard. Clarissa answered the door, visibly reluctant, but not surprised to see us. My mother is resting, she said. What is it now? I merely wish to see your attic, Poirot replied, to which she blinked. The attic? Yes, mademoiselle. A photograph was once taken there, I believe. One that holds a face now seen again. Reluctantly, she led us upstairs. The attic was dusty and filled with forgotten furniture, old trunks, and stacks of yellowed newspapers. Poirot, with remarkable efficiency, scanned the clutter like a man in search of a particular memory. At last, he approached a leather-bound photo album resting atop a hat box. He opened it with care. There, nestled among faded portraits and holiday snapshots, was the image we sought, a group photograph taken on a riverside lawn. Standing third from the left, older, fuller-faced, but unmistakable, was Harold Merton, or rather the man calling himself that. Poirot tapped the photograph gently. Taken 25 years ago, yes? Clarissa leaned over. That's him, but he looks older there than he did yesterday. Exactement, said Poirot, because yesterday he wore a younger name. I stared. So he really is the man your mother saw, the man from the river? Poirot closed the album. He did not drown. He disappeared. But as we know, Hastings, the past is never content to stay buried. It sends reminders, sometimes in the form of orchids, sometimes in photographs. And with that, we descended from the attic, the puzzle tightening like a noose. It was early the next morning when Poirot, seated perfectly upright in the lounge of the inn, announced his intention to begin the true investigation. I, ever his willing companion, set aside my teacup. What do you mean? We've already spoken to everyone. Poirot gave me a look of gentle disappointment. Mon ami, we have heard what they said. Now we must hear what they meant. And so began a series of psychological interviews, unlike anything I had seen before. Poirot summoned each suspect not to a formal interrogation, but to quiet conversations over tea or in shaded gardens. The change of setting, he explained, loosened tongues. Under pressure, he said to me, men close their minds. But when the air is tranquil, they let secrets slip. Roger Bentley arrived first. Poirot spoke amiably, recalling a game of whist they'd once played. Then, with apparent casualness, "You play well, Monsieur Bentley," like a man accustomed to bluffing. Roger laughed, but his fingers tightened on his teacup. "Tell me," Poirot said, How do you feel about Harold's will? His will? I didn't know he'd written one. Poirot only smiled. How curious. Next came Clarissa Weatherby, whom Poirot complimented on her composure. You are like a clock, he said, always ticking, never racing. And yet, inside, perhaps, there is a spring wound too tightly. She said nothing, but her hands trembled. And then the vicar. Monsieur Bates, Poirot intoned, you preach absolution. But what of memory? When the sins of others touch your door, do you open it or bolt it? Bates went red and offered no reply. Afterward, I asked Poirot, you didn't accuse anyone? Non, he said, adjusting his cuffs. To accuse is crude. But to stir the mind, Hastings, that is art. Later that afternoon, we paid another visit to Mrs. Evelyn Merton. She was seated in the parlour, embroidery hoop in hand, though the thread hung unused in her lap. Poirot began gently. Madame, I would speak again of your late husband. You mentioned he had no family, that he was an orphan. She nodded. That's what he told me. Lost them in a railway accident as a child. Poirot leaned forward slightly. And yet, I have spoken with several villagers who recall him mentioning a sister, a woman in Kent. Modest circumstances. He said he visited her last summer. Mrs. Merton blinked. I didn't know. He never told me. A curious omission, non? Poirot said quietly. A man does not hide a sister from his wife unless the relationship is strained, or unless the sister does not exist at all. She looked away. I don't know what to say. Poirot rose and began slowly pacing the room. Did Harold ever receive letters, madame? Letters he did not open before you? She hesitated. Sometimes. He would take them straight to his study. And you did not ask? I trusted him. Poirot nodded slowly, sympathetically. Oui, trust. A beautiful thing. And yet sometimes it blinds us to inconsistency. There was a long silence. Then Poirot turned back, his tone sharper now. Your husband was a man without a past. He wore it like a well-pressed suit, clean, tailored, and entirely false. I wonder, madame, if you ever questioned how it fit so perfectly. Her hands gripped the embroidery hoop. Or, he added softly, did you suspect all along and choose silence? She looked at him then, eyes wide with something close to fear. But she said nothing. Outside, I asked, you think she's hiding something? Poirot replied, I think, mon ami, she has spent 4 years hiding everything, even from herself. We encountered Polly again by chance, this time in the village shop, her apron dusted with flour. She looked startled to see us. Monsieur Poirot, she said, trying to compose herself. What brings you out this way? The pursuit of jam, mademoiselle, Poirot replied. And truth, if it happens to be shelved behind the preserves. She glanced around nervously. I'm on my break. If it's about Mr. Merton, it is always about Mr. Merton. With a resigned sigh, she led us to a quiet lane behind the shop. I didn't say anything before, she began, but I heard something, a few nights before the murder. Poirot nodded slowly. Go on. I was walking past the church when I saw Mr. Merton and the vicar in the garden. They were arguing, not shouting exactly, but tense, urgent. I caught a few words, past catching up, and reputation. Mr. Merton sounded angry. The vicar looked afraid. Did they see you? She shook her head. I don't think so. I ducked away. Poirot's gaze darkened slightly. Merci, mademoiselle. That is most illuminating. We returned to the vicarage without delay. Reverend Bates answered with visible discomfort. You again, he said. Poirot wasted no time. Let us not pretend, monsieur. You argued with Harold Merton days before his death. You feared what he knew. Why? Bates sat down heavily. It's not what you think. Then tell us what it is. The vicar hesitated, then spoke. Years ago, before I came here, I was involved in a financial trust. There was a man, James Harwood. He embezzled funds, disappeared. I was a junior clerk. I didn't report him. I was afraid I'd lose everything. Poirot's voice dropped. And when Harold arrived, calling himself Merton, you recognized him. I wasn't sure, Bates said. He looked younger, but then I saw the scar on his wrist. Same place, same angle. He knew I'd seen it. He smiled. That's when I knew. And so, Poirot murmured, you kept his secret to protect your own. The vicar bowed his head. Poirot turned to me as we left. A vicar's collar, Hastings. It is meant to conceal nothing. But sometimes it hides the throat. The next morning, Poirot requested another meeting with Clarissa Weatherby. She seemed surprised, even wary, but agreed. We met beneath the same hawthorn tree as before, though this time the breeze carried with it the heavy scent of coming rain. Poirot stood beside her, hands clasped behind his back. Mademoiselle, he said gently, I am not here to accuse. I am here to understand. I've told you everything I know, Clarissa replied, her tone clipped, but not cold. Pardon, Poirot murmured, but that is not quite true. Clarissa looked away. He continued, his voice soft. There was a letter. It came shortly before the fete, n'est-ce pas? You received it, read it, and it changed the way you saw Harold Merton. She gave a short, breathless laugh. You make it sound so certain. It is certain, because I observed you, mademoiselle. You were too composed for a woman witnessing madness, unless it was madness you feared might not be madness. She hesitated for a long moment, then reached into her handbag and removed a small, creased envelope. I didn't show anyone. I thought it was a joke or blackmail. Poirot opened the envelope carefully. Inside was a single sheet of paper, typewritten and unsigned. The man you call Harold Merton is not who you think. He has another name, a past. Look closer. I leaned over his shoulder. No sender, no address. Poirot nodded. No, but truth rarely announces itself with fanfare. It prefers shadows. Clarissa bit her lip. Do you think my mother was right all along? Poirot folded the letter and returned it. I think your mother saw the ghost of the truth, and you, mademoiselle, received its warning. As we walked away, Hastings asked, Why hide it from the police? Poirot smiled. Because, mon ami, truth in the wrong hands becomes fear, and fear makes the next lie easier to tell. By the time we returned to the inn, I was thoroughly exhausted, mentally more than physically. My mind felt like it had been spinning through a dozen versions of the same story, none of them quite matching. I must admit, Poirot, I said, slumping into a chair near the fireplace, I haven't the faintest idea who killed Harold Merton. Bien, Poirot replied, pouring himself a cup of tisane. That means we are making progress. I fail to see how confusion is a sign of progress. He stirred his cup precisely twice. Because, mon ami, when the lies begin to tangle, the truth prepares its entrance. I groaned. Let's review, shall we? Evelyn Merton says Harold had no family, but the villagers say he mentioned a sister. Roger Bentley knew him too well to have only known him 3 years. Reverend Bates is hiding his connection to a man named Harwood, and now we've found forged letters, a false war record, and a locked drawer no one has opened. Poirot nodded. Continue. There's Clarissa, who received an anonymous warning and claims to doubt her own mother's instincts, but still kept the letter secret. And then there's Polly, who heard Harold and the vicar arguing days before the murder. And? I threw up my hands. It's like everyone had a reason to lie, but not to kill. Ah, Poirot said, eyes gleaming. And there you have it, the key to the labyrinth. All had cause to lie, but one had cause to silence. I blinked. So you know who did it? I know, he said, sipping delicately, that the truth is like the orchid. It flourishes only in careful conditions. And I, Hastings, have prepared the soil. Poirot. He stood, brushing a non-existent crumb from his sleeve. Tomorrow we gather them. And then, the great unmasking. It is not every day, even in a village accustomed to gossip and small dramas, that the body of a freshly buried man is exhumed. And yet that is precisely what occurred under the stern request, delivered with impeccable courtesy and unshakable insistence, of Hercule Poirot. The villagers were outraged, naturally. Reverend Bates muttered about desecration. Mrs. Merton fainted. Roger Bentley looked as though he might throttle the coroner on the spot. But Poirot remained unmoved. I do not do this lightly, he said to Constable Blythe, who was pale and perspiring beneath his helmet. But when a man has lived a lie, he may try to carry that lie into the grave. I, however, do not permit such untidiness. The grave was opened that afternoon, under discreet supervision, and the body examined. Poirot insisted that a fingerprint comparison be made with the old employment records of one James Harwood, the man who had vanished decades ago after embezzling a large sum from a shipping company in Bristol. The results came in just before twilight. Poirot took the envelope, opened it slowly, and read the contents aloud in the presence of myself, the constable, and a few key villagers. The fingerprints match. Harold Merton was, in truth, James Harwood. A long, stunned silence followed. It was Reverend Bates who broke it. Good Lord! Poirot turned to him. Yes, Reverend. And now that the dead man has told us his real name, we must ask, who among the living already knew it? We returned to the inn that evening under a weight of silence. Even I, who had come to expect revelations from my old friend, felt unmoored. The man the entire village thought they knew had been a fraud, a criminal, a man who had vanished beneath the surface of society only to reappear, polished, soft-spoken and hunted. I watched Poirot stir his tisane with particular care. You've proved he wasn't who he claimed, I said. But what of the murder? He looked up sharply. Patience, Hastings. The body may have been disturbed, yes, but now the truth is stirring, and like a hornet's nest, it will soon make itself felt. The next morning dawned overcast, and still. Even the birdsong seemed hushed. There was a new atmosphere in Little Renford, one of discomfort, of unspoken questions. Everyone had heard. Everyone was wondering the same thing. Who killed James Harwood, and why? Poirot sat at the breakfast table, elegantly slicing into a boiled egg, when I finally broke the silence. So then, I said, you believe someone killed him, not for who he was, but for what he might reveal? Poirot raised one perfectly shaped eyebrow. Enfin, Hastings, you are beginning to think with precision. But who would fear the truth so much? He did not answer immediately. Instead, he stood and walked to the window, hands clasped behind his back. Imagine it, he said. You live a life carefully constructed, a lie in one corner, a secret in another. And then, one day, a man arrives. He knows things, not all, but enough. You realize that should he speak, everything collapses. So you silence him? You must silence him, not in anger, not in passion, but out of preservation, out of fear. The truth becomes dangerous. I considered this. And you believe that's what happened? Poirot turned, eyes sharper than glass. I know it. Consider, mon ami, the timing. Merton, Harwood, had recently grown restless. He was unlocking drawers, writing letters, perhaps preparing to confess, perhaps to blackmail, or perhaps to flee once more. Someone couldn't let that happen, I said slowly. Exactment. But who? Bentley? Bates? Evelyn? Poirot raised a finger. Do not forget Clarissa Weatherby, or the letter she received, and her mother, who recognized a man others forgot. But Clarissa wasn't even certain. No, Hastings, that is what she said. But lies are sometimes truths in disguise. I believe our murderer saw the edge of the noose tightening, and chose instead to pull the lever on another's trapdoor. The metaphor was grisly but apt. Poirot sat once more and folded his napkin neatly. It is time to gather them, Hastings. One by one they have misled us. Now we must bring them together, and I shall bring the symmetry this case so sorely lacks. And the truth. Poirot smiled faintly. Ah, the truth, my friend, is waiting in the drawing room. It was just after 7 o'clock when the guests began to arrive at the Merton drawing room. The air was thick with a quiet tension, as if the very walls had overheard the week's whispered secrets, and now waited, breathless, for their unveiling. Poirot had orchestrated it all with theatrical precision. The chairs were arranged in a semicircle, precisely equidistant from the fireplace, and a low table sat in the centre with a decanter of sherry, untouched. You've done this before, I remarked, as I jotted fresh ink into my notebook. Mais oui, Hastings, Poirot replied, adjusting a small, perfectly folded pocket square. Truth, like a reluctant cat, must sometimes be coaxed with cushions and order, and perhaps a touch of drama. Mrs. Evelyn Merton entered first, pale and resolute. She was followed closely by Roger Bentley, trying a bit too hard to appear casual. The Reverend Bates arrived with his clerical collar slightly askew, hands nervously clasped before him. Clarissa Weatherby and her mother, the ever-fragile Mrs. Weatherby, came next. Clarissa stiff, her mother fluttering with nerves. Lastly, Polly Haines slipped in through the side door, glancing toward Poirot with something between admiration and apprehension. The room fell quiet as Poirot rose and took centre stage. Mes amis, he began, his voice calm and commanding, we are gathered here, not merely to revisit a tragedy, but to bring symmetry to chaos, to restore order to the unnatural rupture that is murder. He paused, letting the silence stretch. You all knew the man who called himself Harold Merton, or so you believed, but one of you knew more. One of you feared what he would reveal, and one of you acted. There was a faint shifting of limbs, a cough suppressed, and the unmistakable weight of collective unease. Poirot lifted his hand. In a moment, I shall tell you who committed the murder. But first, let us speak of identity, of the man you thought you knew. Poirot reached into the small leather folder on the table and withdrew a copy of the fingerprint report, holding it delicately between two fingers. This document confirms what some of you may already suspect, and others have long feared. Harold Merton was, in fact, James Harwood, a man presumed dead for over 20 years. He turned to face them all, one by one. A man who vanished from Bristol in 1924 after embezzling a substantial sum from his employer. A man who left behind ruin, suspicion, and silence. Reverend Bates flinched. Poirot did not miss it. James Harwood, he continued, was no common thief. He was meticulous, intelligent, and ruthless. He disappeared without a trace, until, 3 years ago, he re-emerged in Little Renford under a new name, a new life, a carefully curated persona. One designed not for fame, but for invisibility. Poirot began pacing slowly, his footsteps soft on the carpet. Consider it. No friends from before, no photographs of youth, no letters from family. He was a man who had severed every tie, who crafted himself anew in the safety of rural England. He played the role of the quiet solicitor to perfection. But people did know him, said Clarissa suddenly. My mother, she remembered him. Poirot smiled. Indeed, Because the past, mademoiselle, is not so easily buried. He turned toward Mrs. Weatherby. You recognized the man who ruined your husband, and you fainted. Not out of madness, but out of memory. She blinked, and a single tear slipped down her cheek. Poirot's voice dropped slightly, turning theatrical. Now, let us consider the others. He gestured toward Bentley. A friend too loyal for a man he barely knew. A vicar. He turned to Bates. With a secret past intertwined with Harwood's disappearance. And a wife. His gaze fell on Evelyn, who never questioned her husband's lies. Or did she? Poirot stopped and glanced toward the fireplace, where the flickering light cast long shadows on the floor. And what of the letter, the anonymous warning sent to Clarissa? A desperate attempt to unearth the truth, or to divert suspicion. No one spoke. Poirot placed the folder on the table. James Harwood lived a lie, and like all lies, it grew heavy. He began to speak of leaving, of coming clean, and someone in this room could not allow that. He stepped back, hands behind his back. We are close now, mes amis. Soon, you will understand why Harold Merton died. But first, we must sweep away the final illusions, for the killer is not who you think, and the reason is not hatred, but fear. Mrs. Weatherby sat slightly apart from the others, wrapped in a shawl, her expression tense and glassy-eyed. She looked far older than when I'd first seen her collapse at the village fete. There was a fragile dignity to her now, a woman long burdened by memories too vivid to fade. Poirot turned his attention toward her with uncharacteristic gentleness. Madame, he said, it is time. You recognize the man they called Harold Merton, not because of a shared past in Little Renford, but because you had once known him under another name. She inhaled sharply. I thought I must be wrong, she murmured. I prayed I was. But you were not, Poirot said softly. James Harwood, the man who ruined your husband, the man who vanished after the collapse of the shipping firm in Bristol. You saw him, reborn in this village, wearing new clothes and a new name. Her eyes welled. My husband trusted him, she whispered. He vouched for him before the board. When it all collapsed, the disgrace was too much. He took his own life a month later. James Harwood destroyed him. And when you saw him again? Poirot prompted. I couldn't believe it, but it was him, the same eyes, the same scar on his temple, the man who had taken everything from us. Poirot nodded solemnly. Yet you said nothing. What could I do? No one believed me, not even Clarissa. And the moment passed. I told myself it was grief, a ghost. Poirot stepped closer, lowering his voice to a murmur. But it was not grief, madame. It was memory. And memory, once awakened, does not return quietly to sleep. She looked at him, eyes burning with regret. You're right. He bowed slightly. Merci, Madame Weatherby. You did not strike the blow, but you provided the ghost. Poirot's gaze shifted now to Roger Bentley. The man fidgeted in his seat, the sharp composure he had worn so confidently earlier, now visibly cracking. Ah, Monsieur Bentley, Poirot said, strolling to stand directly behind him. You have been loyal. Too loyal, no? Bentley bristled. Loyalty is not a crime. No, Poirot agreed. But fear sometimes is. You knew who Harold truly was, didn't you? Long before Mrs. Weatherby fainted. Bentley tried to stand, but Poirot raised a hand. Sit, please. The room held its breath. Your friendship, Poirot continued, was not born in this village. You knew him before. In Bristol. Bentley's jaw twitched. I didn't know it was him, not at first. But in time, you remembered. A name, a mannerism, a phrase, perhaps even a photo, and with it came panic. You, too, had been tied to the shipping firm, yes? Bentley finally spoke, his voice low. I was young. Harwood offered me a job. I didn't know he was siphoning money. When it all came crashing down, I lost everything. And so, Poirot said, with a dramatic sweep of his hand, when you realized who Harold Merton truly was, you feared exposure, that your involvement would come to light, that your own misjudgment, long buried, might resurface. I didn't kill him, Bentley snapped. I didn't even confront him. No, Poirot said. You wrote a letter. Bentley's mouth opened, closed. Poirot turned to Clarissa. It was he who sent the anonymous warning, a desperate man, trying to shift the danger away from himself, to push someone, anyone, into acting before he was discovered. Bentley slumped. I didn't think anyone would die. Fear, Poirot said gently, makes cowards of clever men. And in your fear, Monsieur Bentley, you lit the match. But the fire, it was not yours. Reverend Bates had remained unusually silent during the entire affair, but now all eyes turned to him. His fingers clutched the hem of his sleeve, knuckles white, a sheen of sweat glistening at his temples. Poirot walked slowly toward him, speaking not as an accuser, but as a confessor. You vouched for him, Reverend, for Harold Merton, a man you barely knew, or rather, a man you knew too well, knew too. I didn't know for sure, Bates said stiffly. He came to me in need of guidance. I offered it. Poirot nodded thoughtfully. Guidance, yes, but also discretion. You recognized the man, as Bentley did, not immediately perhaps, but enough to be troubled. I thought I owed him nothing, the vicar muttered, but he came to church. He donated, he kept to himself. Who was I to dredge up the past? Ah, Poirot said, but it was not silence alone you offered him, was it? You helped him secure the property, you vouched for his character. A man without a past, needing only a little credibility. Bates said nothing. Poirot reached into his breast pocket and retrieved a copy of the deed transfer. Your name appears not only as character reference, but as spiritual sponsor. There was a murmur in the room. Poirot's voice hardened. He paid you. Bates closed his eyes. It was a donation to the church. Poirot raised a finger. Number, it was hush money, a small price to ensure that your own past, your silent complicity in the Harwood scandal, remained undisturbed. I wasn't involved in the fraud, Bates said, a crack in his voice. But I saw things. I ignored them. I should have spoken up back then. I didn't. And so you chose silence again. Bates looked down, defeated. Poirot turned away. You feared what his reappearance might stir, but you feared your own guilt more. And then he looked at each of them, eyes glittering. One by one, you all protected yourselves, but only one of you went further. One of you ensured that James Harwood could never speak again. There was a long silence after Poirot's final accusation hung in the air. The fire crackled faintly in the hearth. Evelyn Merton sat very still in her chair, her hands folded neatly, her eyes fixed on Poirot with a curious intensity. And yet, there was no outrage, no protests, only silence. Poirot stepped forward, his voice suddenly softer. You are a woman of grace, madame, of elegance, a creature of order like myself. Still, she did not speak. You married a man who offered peace, discretion, a life without questions. You built a routine, a structure, but it was all based on a lie. Evelyn's voice, when it came, was calm. I didn't know at first, Poirot nodded, but eventually you discovered. Yes. Her eyes flickered with something I couldn't name, shame, perhaps, or grief. There were signs, phrases he used, names he avoided, and then the drawer. The drawer, Poirot repeated, which you opened the night before the murder, using the key from his chain while he slept. Her fingers trembled. I found a photograph, letters, the truth she inhaled slowly. I confronted him the next evening, in the greenhouse. You begged him to leave, Poirot said gently, to vanish again. He refused. He said no one would believe me, that his past was gone, that I owed him loyalty. Poirot's voice was grave. But you saw the truth, madame. You saw what would happen if the past came to light. Your reputation would be ruined. You, the respectable wife, the solicitor's widow, everything you'd built would crumble. A faint sheen of tears glistened in her eyes. I didn't mean to, she began, but Poirot raised a hand. You went to the greenhouse that night as he watered the orchids. You took the brass canister and struck once, precisely, cleanly, the weapon of a woman who planned to silence a man, forever. Gasps echoed around the room. Clarissa covered her mouth. The Reverend turned pale. But it wasn't hatred, was it? Poirot said, looking into Evelyn's eyes. It was despair, and a desire to preserve a truth more palatable than reality. Mrs. Merton's face crumpled. I only ever wanted a quiet life. And so, Poirot murmured, you took a stranger's lie and made it your truth, until that truth turned against you. She didn't resist as Constable Blythe moved forward. She merely stood, chin high, and said softly, At least now, it's finished. Poirot watched her go, a sadness behind his eyes. No, madame, he said to the empty doorway. Now, it truly begins. After the constable led Evelyn Merton away, the room remained in stunned silence. It was I who finally broke it. But Poirot, how did you know? He turned to me, adjusting a slightly crooked tassel on the fireplace mantel. There were many signs, Hastings. But the first, the silence, Poirot nodded. Everyone else had a story, a suspicion, a version of Harold, but Madame Merton, the woman who should have known him best, had only vagueness, no childhood anecdotes, no old colleagues, no documents, no photographs. It was unnatural. I frowned. But how did you tie her to the actual crime? Poirot smiled. Ah, the soil, mon ami. Orchids require a very specific medium, rare bark, minerals, charcoal. It leaves a trace. He walked to the table where a small evidence envelope lay. Inside, a swatch of delicate fabric, faintly stained. On the cuffs of her gardening gloves, Hastings, the same orchid compound found at the murder scene, but only on her gloves, not on Harold's, nor Polly's, nor the gardener's. I whistled. So it wasn't just a crime of opportunity, it was personal. Intimately so, Poirot said. She did not strike in rage, she planned, with the calm precision of a woman who has made peace with the necessity of her actions. He straightened his cuffs. She lived beside a lie for years, believing it would never demand payment. But lies, Hastings, are like debts. Sooner or later they come due. I leaned back, exhaling. Poor woman. Poirot's moustache twitched. Sympathy is natural, but justice, it is essential. He stepped toward the door, pausing only to glance back with a final reflection. She thought she married a stranger, Hastings, but in truth, it was she who became one. Mrs. Evelyn Merton stood in the fading firelight of the drawing room, her hands still folded as if in prayer. The rest of the room had emptied. Clarissa and her mother were escorted home in silence. Bentley and Bates left pale and quiet under Constable supervision. But she remained. Not by obligation, I think, but by resignation. Poirot paced slowly, deliberately, between the grand piano and the hearth. The stillness was unbearable. I knew, she whispered. Her voice cracked slightly, not with hysteria, but weariness. Not from the beginning, but over time. The way he avoided photographs, his reluctance to speak of childhood. He had no past, only a version of one. Poirot nodded gravely. You did not know who he was. But you knew he was not who he claimed to be. Her eyes found the fire. I wanted to believe it didn't matter, that if he was kind and steady, I could ignore the cracks. But they widened, Poirot said gently. Oui, madame, and when you found the documents, you saw the man fully and understood the cost. She turned then, fully facing him. It wasn't to protect me, Monsieur Poirot. It was to protect the lie. I'd built a life around a man I never truly knew. And if he confessed, if the newspapers came, if the neighbours talked, then what did that make me? She sank slowly into the armchair. A fool? An accomplice? Or just a woman too frightened to start again? Poirot looked at her long and quietly, then bowed his head. The law will judge your actions, he said softly, but it is only the heart that will measure your silence. She smiled faintly. You were very gentle with me, Monsieur Poirot. Poirot's moustaches twitched. Even justice, madame, must wear velvet gloves when it knocks upon grief. Later, as we walked through the village lanes on our way back to the inn, I couldn't help but replay the entire affair in my mind. She fooled everyone, I said aloud, even me. Poirot gave a small, knowing smile. And yet, mon ami, she was the only one who did not lie. I blinked. But she lied about everything. Non, Hastings, she omitted. There is a difference. Lies are spoken. Omissions are chosen. He stopped beside a hedgerow blooming with moonlit blossom. Everyone else had a theory. Bentley, Bates, Clarissa. They speculated. They constructed motives. They offered the convenient truths of suspicion. But Evelyn said nothing. Exactement, Poirot said, raising a finger. And therein lay her undoing. I frowned. So her silence, what? Made her guilty. No, Hastings, her silence revealed her knowledge. When a wife knows nothing of her husband, she defends him with questions, disbelief, emotion. But when she knows too much, she becomes careful, measured. Flat, he tapped his temple. To the ears, she was calm. To the eyes, resigned. But to the little grey cells, she was thunder in a cloak of stillness. I stared at him in admiration. And that was enough? Poirot straightened his lapels. Mon ami, when the truth hides, it is not noise that reveals it, but silence. Back in the inn's lounge, I poured us each a small nightcap and collapsed into the armchair opposite Poirot, whose egg-shaped head was gently bobbing as he polished his already immaculate shoes. Do you know, I said, I'm convinced you've developed some second sense, something the rest of us mortals lack. Poirot looked up with exaggerated modesty. Hastings, flattery is a charming indulgence, but detection is merely a matter of attention. You say that, but the rest of us were chasing fingerprints and motives, and you were… What? Listening for what people didn't say? He nodded. Just so. He set the shoe aside and leaned forward. You see, mon ami, it is the absence of truth that leaves the clearest shape. When everyone rushes to fill the silence, the one who does not, she is telling you where to look. But how can you be sure? I asked. Poirot sipped his tisane. Because people lie in words, but very few can lie in behaviour, especially when the stakes are personal. He stood then, stretching gently. We listen to what is said, but it is equally important to listen to what is not said. In that gap, mon ami, hides the motive, the means, and the murderer. I chuckled. You make it sound poetic. Poirot raised his eyebrows. But detection is poetry, Hastings. It is rhythm, symmetry, cadence, and above all, order. And with that, he picked up his walking stick and turned toward the stairs. But now, he added, with a twinkle in his eye, it is time for sleep. Tomorrow, perhaps, a case involving fewer orchids and more sleep. It was a curious turn of events that brought Clarissa Weatherby back to the doorstep of the Merton residence only 2 days after the arrest. This time, however, she wore neither suspicion nor grief, but disbelief. They said the funds were unclaimed, she told us, her hands clutching the folded parchment, held in a Swiss account under the name J.H. James Harwood. Poirot, seated near the hearth with an air of satisfied symmetry, gave a slight bow of the head. And now, mademoiselle, they are yours. She blinked. But how? Why? It is poetic, Poirot murmured. Do you not think? Your father's company was one of those ruined by Harwood's disappearance. The very man whose deception crushed your family's fortunes left behind a hidden trail, a forgotten key to his past. She sat quietly, unfolding the document again, as if afraid it might vanish. Poirot continued, It appears Harwood, perhaps as a final act of conscience, designated the dormant account to transfer to the daughter of the man he destroyed, should it ever be discovered. I couldn't help but marvel at the irony. So, after all this, she inherits the very money that wrecked her childhood. Clarissa gave a soft laugh. Perhaps it's justice, of a kind. Poirot nodded. Not justice by law, but by balance. As I often say, le passé ne meurt jamais. The past does not die, Hastings. It merely waits. Clarissa folded the letter and stood. I don't know what to do with it. Poirot rose, taking her hand gently. Live well, mademoiselle, and let that be the final chapter. She smiled, said nothing, and walked out into the brightening spring afternoon. Later that evening, we returned to the inn, where Mrs. Hargrove greeted us with a tray of tea and buttered scones, her face flushed with curiosity, but blessedly silent. Another cup, Monsieur Poirot? She asked brightly. Poirot raised one eyebrow and peered disdainfully into the porcelain. Non, madame. I fear I must decline. She blinked. No more English tea. He set the cup aside with exaggerated delicacy. Tea brewed in haste is a crime, but English tea, mon cher Hastings, is a catastrophe. It is the betrayal of leaves in tepid water. I burst out laughing. Poirot stood, retrieving his gloves and cane. Come, Hastings, let us walk before supper. My mind is satisfied, but my moustaches require fresh air. As we stepped out into the twilight, the quiet village resumed its rhythm behind us. The mystery had passed, but its ripples remained. I shook my head. You really do hate our tea, don't you? Poirot smiled. Not hate, Hastings. I simply admire order. An English tea, alas, has none. And with that, he tipped his hat to a startled postman and vanished down the lane, leaving behind a trail of logic, elegance, and the faintest scent of bergamot. And so, as the curtain falls on another quiet village with secrets far louder than its Sunday bells, one truth remains eternal. Even the most carefully buried lies will one day push through the soil, seeking light. For Poirot, it was not a fingerprint, nor a confession, but a silence too perfect, a glove too clean, and a wife too calm that revealed the killer. Mon ami, Poirot said, the truth, it is never loud, but it is always patient, and in the end, it will always find its voice. To which I replied, with my usual awe and a bit of exhaustion. Next time, Poirot, perhaps we could solve a case that doesn't involve orchids, exhumations, or English tea. What do you think was the biggest clue that gave Evelyn Merton away? Was it her silence, the glove, or something else entirely? Share your theory in the comments. We'd love to hear your detective mind at work. If you enjoyed this Hercule Poirot mystery, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Your support helps us bring a new thrilling detective story to life every week. More brilliant deductions, unexpected twists, and Poirot's little grey cells are coming very soon.